Hey everyone, Tarek here. Ever find yourself in a conversation where you're just waiting for your turn to speak instead of truly listening? We've all been there. Today, we're diving into something that might just revolutionize how you connect with others. It's about shifting our focus from formulating a response to genuinely understanding the person in front of us. This isn't just about being polite. It's about building deeper, more meaningful relationships. The magic is in listening to understand. This means putting your own thoughts on hold and fully immersing yourself in the other person's world. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you. How did it feel? Probably pretty amazing, right? That's the power we're talking about. All right, let's get real. Why is it sometimes so hard to connect with people, even those we care about? I used to think it was just me, but then I stumbled upon this idea that blew my mind. We have a language barrier, and it's not what you think. It's not about different languages. It's about how we use our words internally and externally. We often use judgmental language without realizing it. Take the example of the 2011 Arab Spring, where social media was full of judgmental statements from all sides. Phrases like "they're wrong" or "we're right" were everywhere. These judgments create immediate barriers, making genuine dialogue almost impossible. Our words can trigger defensiveness instead of empathy. Let's say a colleague is late to a meeting. Instead of saying, "you're always late," which triggers defensiveness, we could say, "I noticed you were late today." This opens up the conversation without immediate blame. Misunderstandings often arise from assumptions, not facts. For instance, during the 2008 financial crisis, many assumed it was solely the fault of greedy bankers. While there was certainly ethical lapses, the reality was a complex mix of deregulation, risky lending practices, and a housing bubble. Jumping to conclusions without understanding the full picture leads to misunderstandings and prevents us from finding real solutions. So, how do we break down these barriers and start connecting on a deeper level? That's where Nonviolent Communication, or NVC, comes in. Developed by psychologist Marshall Rosenberg, NVC gives us a simple yet powerful four-part formula for compassionate communication. I know formula sounds a bit rigid, but trust me, it's a game changer when it comes to understanding and being understood. Let's go through it together. First up is observation. This is about stating the facts of a situation without any evaluation or judgment. It's like being a neutral reporter. For example, instead of saying, "you always leave your dirty dishes in the sink," which is an evaluation and likely to trigger defensiveness, you could say, "I noticed there are 3 dirty dishes in the sink." See the difference? It's just the facts, no added drama. Next, we have feelings. This is where you express how the situation makes you feel, using I statements and avoiding blame. So, instead of, "you make me so angry when you do that," you could say, "I feel frustrated when I see dirty dishes in the sink." This subtle shift is huge. You're owning your feelings without making the other person responsible for them. Third, we identify our needs. This is about understanding what's truly important to you in the situation. It could be a need for order, cooperation, respect, or something else. In our example, you might say, "because I have a need for a clean and orderly kitchen." This helps the other person understand your perspective on a deeper level. Finally, we have the request. This is where you make a clear, doable request that could help meet your needs. It should be something specific and positive. For instance, instead of "don't be so messy," which is negative and vague, you could say, "would you be willing to wash your dishes after you use them?" It's clear, positive, and gives the other person a concrete way to help. Let's dive a bit deeper into that first step, observation. This is where we really put on our detective hats and focus on the facts, and only the facts. Sounds simple, right? But it's surprisingly easy to mix up observations with our own interpretations, and that's where things can get messy. The key here is to separate facts from interpretations. Think of the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education case in the US. The observation was that schools were segregated based on race. The interpretation was that this segregation inherently implied inferiority. By focusing on the observable fact of segregation, the Supreme Court could address the issue without getting lost in subjective interpretations. We also need to avoid exaggerations and generalizations. Let's say a political candidate makes a promise they don't fully keep. Instead of saying, politicians always break their promises, which is a generalization, we could say, candidate X promised to lower taxes by 10%, but only lowered them by 2%. This keeps the conversation grounded in specific, observable events. Finally, focus on specific behaviors, not character judgments. Consider the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Instead of saying, Iran is untrustworthy, which is a character judgment, the countries involved focused on specific, observable behaviors related to nuclear development. This allowed for a concrete agreement based on verifiable actions rather than subjective opinions about Iran's character. Let's talk about feelings. Not always the easiest topic, but so crucial for real connection. Think of your feelings as messengers, each carrying important information about your inner world. For instance, frustration often signals that something you need isn't being met. Maybe it's a need for efficiency, order, or understanding. When you feel frustrated, don't just push it away. Ask yourself, what need of mine isn't being met right now? For example, if you're frustrated with a project's slow progress, the unmet need might be for efficiency or collaboration. Anxiety, on the other hand, often points to a need for security or predictability. Think about the widespread anxiety during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. The lack of information and the rapidly changing situation created a deep sense of insecurity for many. Recognizing this helps us understand why people reacted in certain ways and allows us to address the root cause of the anxiety. Now, let's look at the positive side. Joy often arises when we experience deep connection, achievement, or meaning. Think about the joy of the Indian independence movement in 1947. It wasn't just about political freedom. It was about the deep connection and shared identity of a nation finally achieving self-determination. Recognizing the source of our joy helps us appreciate and cultivate more of those moments. And finally, sadness. It's often a response to loss or disconnection. Consider the global outpouring of sadness after the death of Nelson Mandela in 2013. It wasn't just sadness for the loss of a great leader, but also a collective acknowledgement of the loss of a symbol of hope and reconciliation. Understanding sadness allows us to grieve, heal, and move forward with greater empathy. All right, we've talked about observations and feelings. Now let's get to the heart of it all. Needs. This is where things get really interesting because needs are universal. We all share them, regardless of our backgrounds or beliefs. Understanding this can be a total game changer in how we relate to each other. First off, needs are universal and fundamental. Think about things like safety, respect, autonomy, connection, and meaning. These are things that every human being needs, regardless of their culture or background. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a great example of this concept. It shows that basic physiological needs like food and shelter are fundamental, but we also have needs for safety, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Needs are not dependent on specific people or actions. This is important. Your need for respect, for example, isn't tied to getting it from a particular person. It's a general need. This distinction helps us avoid getting stuck in power struggles or feeling dependent on others for our well-being. For example, during the civil rights movement in the US, the need for equality and respect was not dependent on specific individuals granting it. It was a fundamental human need. Recognizing needs fosters empathy and understanding. When you can see that someone's difficult behavior might be stemming from an unmet need, it's easier to approach them with compassion rather than judgment. For example, if a child is acting out in school, it might be because they have an unmet need for attention or understanding, not because they're inherently bad. Needs are the root of our feelings and motivations. When our needs are met, we tend to feel positive emotions like joy, contentment, and peace. When they're not met, we experience negative emotions like frustration, anger, and sadness. Understanding this connection is key to navigating our emotional landscape. It's like a roadmap that helps us understand why we feel what we feel and what we truly need. All right, we're now at the final piece of the NVC puzzle, the request. This is where we move from understanding to action, but it's crucial to do it in a way that invites cooperation rather than resistance. Think of a request as an invitation to connect and collaborate, not a demand. First, remember that requests are not demands. A demand implies that there will be negative consequences if the person doesn't comply. A request, on the other hand, leaves room for a no without punishment. Think of it like this. If you're asking someone to pass the salt at dinner, you're making a request. You're not going to get angry if they say they can't reach it. Phrase requests positively. Instead of saying what you don't want, say what you do want. For instance, instead of, "Don't leave your clothes on the floor," try, "Could you please put your clothes in the hamper?" It's a small change, but it makes a big difference in how the request is received. Be specific and concrete. Vague requests can lead to confusion and inaction. Instead of, "Be more helpful around the house," try, "Would you be willing to take out the trash on Tuesdays and Fridays?" The more specific you are, the easier it is for the other person to understand and meet your request. Ensure the other person has a choice. A true request means the other person can say no without fear of punishment or guilt. This creates a sense of trust and respect. It's about finding solutions that work for both of you, not just getting your way. For example, when the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998, ending decades of conflict in Northern Ireland. The negotiations were successful partly because all parties felt they had a genuine choice and their needs were considered, leading to a mutually acceptable agreement. Okay, let's see how this all comes together in some real-life situations. We'll look at two scenarios, one at work and one at home, and see how applying NVC can transform the conversation. On the left, we have a common workplace conflict, and on the right, a typical family disagreement. In both cases, we'll see how using the 4 steps of NVC, observation, feeling, need, and request, can turn a potentially explosive situation into a constructive dialogue. Let's start with the workplace. Imagine a colleague who constantly interrupts you in meetings. A typical reaction might be, "You always interrupt me in meetings." This is likely to make the person defensive and shut down communication. Now, let's apply NVC. When I'm interrupted in meetings, observation, I feel disrespected. Feeling, because I need to be heard. Need. Would you be willing to let me finish my thoughts before sharing yours? Request. This approach clearly states the issue without judgment, expresses your feelings and needs, and makes a specific, doable request. Now, let's move to the family scenario. Imagine a situation where you're frustrated with a family member not helping with chores. A common response might be, "You never help with chores." This is likely to lead to an argument and resentment. Using NVC, we can reframe it like this. When I see the dishes piled up after dinner, observation, I feel overwhelmed. Feeling, because I need support with household tasks. Need. Could we agree on a schedule for sharing chores? Request. This approach opens up a conversation about finding a solution that works for everyone, rather than escalating the conflict. Let's talk about the ripple effect of using NVC. It's not just about resolving conflicts, it's about fundamentally changing the way we relate to each other. At the heart of it all is empathy. When we genuinely try to understand another person's feelings and needs, we create a connection that goes beyond surface-level interactions. We start to see them as a whole person, not just someone who's opposing us. Think about empathy as a bridge that allows us to cross over from our own perspective and enter another person's world, even if just for a moment. This leads us to deeper understanding. When we understand the why behind someone's actions, it's much easier to move past judgment and find common ground. It's like seeing the world through a different lens, one that expands our own perspective and enriches our understanding of human nature. This doesn't mean we always agree, but it allows us to disagree with respect and compassion. For instance, understanding the historical context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, including the needs and fears of both sides, can lead to a more nuanced and empathetic understanding, even if a resolution remains complex. NVC also fosters collaboration. When we approach conflicts with a focus on needs and requests, we open the door to finding solutions that work for everyone involved. It's about moving from a me versus you mentality to a we mentality. We start to see the other person as a partner in finding a solution, not an adversary. This is how breakthroughs happen, both in personal relationships and on a larger scale. Think about the collaborative efforts in international climate agreements, where countries with diverse interests come together to address a shared challenge. Finally, NVC promotes growth, both individually and collectively. Every conflict, when handled with empathy and understanding, becomes an opportunity for learning and growth. We learn more about ourselves, our own needs and triggers, and we learn more about others. This process transforms conflict from something to be feared into something that can actually strengthen our relationships and make us better people. So, how do you start incorporating NVC into your own life? It might seem a bit overwhelming at first, but remember, it's a practice. Start small, practice often, and watch how it gradually transforms your interactions and relationships. You might be surprised at the impact it has, not just on the people around you, but on your own well-being. The real magic is in the transformation. It's not just about changing how you communicate, it's about changing how you see the world and your place in it. By embracing NVC, you're choosing to build bridges instead of walls, to connect instead of divide. And that, my friends, is how we start to transform our world, one conversation at a time.